Hello to all members of SUG Chennai. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I welcome you all to the webinar on Migrating to XM Cloud with our esteemed guest speaker, Jason, who is the Director of Developer Relations at Sitecore. Today, we'll explore the benefits, challenges, and the best practices for a seamless transition from traditional Sitecore into XM Cloud. I thank you all for joining us in this exciting webinar, and I thank Jason for accepting to share his expertise and taking time out of his busy schedule. Let's get ready to embark on an enlightening journey into the world of XM Cloud with Jason.
What are the kind of challenges they might have to plan for? So today, I want to go through a bit of that. The title here is The Future is Now. You may have heard our Chief Product Officer talk about how the future is composable and the future is now. And this is really about making that decision of going from a platform, do you want to get into the composable world? Is XM Cloud the right choice? So what I want to first get into is a little bit about me. As was mentioned, I work over at Sitecore. I spent about 6 years over on the partner side, building, doing upgrades, having to do implementations, all that kind of stuff. And then I've spent just over 6 years right now over at Sitecore on the other side. How can I help all of our technology audience? So the team that I have under me, you know a lot of them like Rob Earlham and Mark Van Alst or Thomas Desmond, Dylan Young, and some others. Tomas Varga and Nicole do a lot of our community work. And of course, something that they're very involved in is the SugCon event. So we're going to want everybody to head over to that. So why don't I just talk about that real quick? I would be amiss when talking to a group in Chennai about mentioning SugCon India. Like we would have to get as many of you folks to be able to get there as possible. If you can make it to New Delhi at the end of August, try to get there. There's going to be all kinds of people there. I know that at least from tech marketing, we're going to have Peter Brinkman and Rob Earlham that are going to fly in, have some presentations. Make sure to check out the agenda that's up on the SugCon India site. And you can see which sessions are up, what times, what days. There's going to be so many good speakers. So if you can get in there, you can buy tickets through the site and see who's going to be of interest to you. In any case, what is today? Today, let's get through that as well. I want to talk a little bit about the difference with XM Cloud, why some people are deciding that this is the right shift for them, why this is suddenly one of our biggest selling products. And then the question of should you migrate? It's not always a yes right away, right? So with that, I want to talk through some scenarios today. So 4 scenarios in specific that look at different ways that a customer might present. To give you an idea of if you see a scenario, what are the types of thoughts you go through? What are the possible options you could look at? And then wrap up with things to kind of watch out for. So you might have different scenarios where you want to know what are some things that might trip you up or what are some good practices, that type of stuff. It's not exhaustive. Get through what I can today. Finally, we'll wrap it up. Any questions you might have, I'll share some resources that might be helpful for you to use. And then we'll see what kind of questions are on. So with that, let's get into the meat of things. Let's start taking a look at what's so different about XM Cloud from the Sitecore XM and XP that we all know and love. First off, the obvious thing is the shiny newness, right? We've had 20 plus years of a product slowly growing, and there's been a big investment to make XM Cloud jump into a very modern feel that's more efficient, a lot of user experience design going into this. And there's the whole, how do we keep teams up to date? How do we get that infrastructure management off their shoulders? How do we make this a true composable solution? So a lot of that stuff is very appealing to folks who are looking at XM Cloud in general as a solution. It's got the pedigree of a great content management system. It's got the Sitecore name behind it. It's got all those years of experience, but it's also got that modern feel on it. There are some things when we're looking at migration specifically where the decision might be, do I just upgrade to the latest on platform or do I make the move to XM Cloud? So there are some things that are only with XM Cloud. I mentioned being able to be SaaS based, and that comes with having a cloud portal. You can manage all your deployments, your projects, your environments. That's something that we provide with XM Cloud. It's not available if you're on-prem, obviously. You might have something similar with like Amazon or with Azure or something like that might manage your like web deployments. On top of that, we have features and functions that are only available inside of XM Cloud. So Cy-Core Pages is a brand new evolution of what we've done in the past. So on premise, you might have seen Experience Editor and then Horizon, which was recently removed, I think in 10.3. And then we have the newer version, which is now Pages. So Pages is available as a SaaS app only with XM Cloud. We also have this brand new thing, and this is, I think, one of the exciting things we're going to see in the future is this component builder. It's still early access, but it is very interesting how you can have this low-code approach to being able to build out components for your site, add them into pages, and also have them just kind of drop onto any site, whether it's Sitecore or not. It has a purely service-based, API-based kind of interface to it, which opens up a lot of opportunities. And coming soon, we're also going to be adding in the ability for you to bring your own code to Component Builder, which allowed you to then like you have your own renderings and stuff and register that in to be used by the Component Builder. So this is going to be a very cool, this is where I think the future of componentry is going to be in terms of Sitecore. In terms of personalization and analytics, XM Cloud has this, XMXP has personalization and analytics. We're only through XM Cloud, we offer embedded personalization through Sitecore Personalize, which then allows us to have headless personalization, which then can be upgraded if somebody goes beyond the limits of XM Cloud, and they can go to Sitecore Personalize, and that's something we can only do with XM Cloud right now. On premise, if somebody wants to go to headless, they would add Sitecore Personalize directly. They can't get that directly inside of the XM platform. And finally, the thing that makes a lot of folks, want to have to go to this is not ever having to worry about installing a hot patch again, or what the latest upgrade is to some new version. That all goes away as we continuously update all the time with new features, new patches, everything that we can do with XM Cloud because we're managing that infrastructure. So these are some of the reasons that you might see something on XM Cloud that is a benefit versus staying on the platform. All right, that aside, why should you even migrate? Is a customer going to want to do it? And not all times. It depends, because some scenarios have very specific data control requirements, or they're connecting to infrastructure that's inside their network that cannot be exposed in any way. They may also, regardless of feature function, they might have just done a massive upgrade and rebuild, and like they've spent a whole bunch of money and doing a new project. Now's not the time for us to now go, okay, let's pick this all up and go migrate. So there are customers where, yes, XM Cloud could be your future, but maybe right now is not the time to do it. I see 3 customer profiles where if you're in the room with them, this is a good time to talk to them about XM Cloud as an option. The first one is that early adopter. Now, these folks, we love these folks, right? They're ahead of Sitecore. They're already gone SaaS with most of their stuff. They've got these best of fit solutions. They've basically been waiting for Sitecore to catch up. They built everything headless. They don't want to manage the infrastructure, and they love that we have an option now. These are the people we really want to get going over into XM Cloud because they're ready for it. They have the teams that know how to do it. Then there's something I like to call the maintainer. So this is somebody who they want to be on the latest version. They always, or maybe they do V-1, something like that. So they're constantly doing those upgrades. They're putting in the patches. They're making sure they're up to date, but they're probably still running the same site they had before. Maybe it's SXA or MVC. They haven't transitioned to headless. Their pain is the fact that they keep doing these updates. They keep doing these upgrades. They're not getting a lot of benefit because they're not necessarily always taking advantage of those new features. Going to something like a SaaS platform would allow them to keep up to date like they want to, but then not have to worry about whether or not they're doing the work for managing all that infrastructure, managing all those upgrades. And the last one that I see as kind of a good fit, and I had a heck of a time trying to come up with a name for this presentation. I'm calling it the modernizer, but essentially this is somebody who does not continuously invest. They want to do a big project. They probably did a big project like 5 or 6 years ago or something like that. So they're on an older version. Their site needs to be modernized, they're in a perfect scenario where they're looking like, okay, yeah, we got to go do a project on this. And this is a time to have them look at an XM Cloud solution, be able to get on the latest so that they're not having to do this again when they want to do an upgrade or something like that. They're not having to think about like, oh, am I up to date? So this is a great option also to look at. So given those, why don't we walk through few scenarios, see how they fit in with those customer profiles, and how we might be able to take them through kind of a gradual transition into XM Cloud. So first up is probably the simplest one. These people already headless. They've done everything they could with the platform thing to make it essentially a composable solution. They've done all the upgrades. They really want to get into a fully composable stack. So their steps are pretty simple. They migrate to XM Cloud with their current solution. They launch it, retire the old thing. They've done all the work in advance. So if we look at something like what does their solution look like today on platform, you see they've already transitioned into headless. They've already got other services in their composable stack. They're even using Edge in this scenario. They basically have to cut out this XM content delivery has to go away. They need to migrate their content over into XM Cloud, and then they're done. So this is a very simple transition. That application is already using the Edge APIs. This is a great scenario to be in. Not a lot of customers are going to be in this scenario, but if over time we can get customers to this scenario, it makes it easier for them to adopt XM Cloud. Now let's look at something that maybe a lot of you have seen before. And this is a classic MVC scenario. Somebody who is that modernizer profile. They haven't done an investment in a while. They're probably built on MVC, and they've done a lot of work to get some personalization going, but they haven't really gone down that road very far. So they've got maybe some geolocation based personalization or session based personalization. Something simple, something that's a perfect fit for what happens in XM Cloud. So in that scenario, they've got more steps that they have to do. First, they're probably going to want to reduce the number of steps. So rather than like gradually getting into headless, they're just going to go straight with their content over at XM Cloud because it matches up pretty well. Then they'll build out that whatever that new UX is. They want to do that refresh. They want to have a brand new look and feel. They'll do that pointed at XM Cloud, all the while their current site is up. And then they can launch that site, retire their existing. And I usually suggest that with this type of a model, I might pick that they implement the personalization after. And the reason I suggest this would be if you want to get the most bang for your buck, as they say, if you stop, you've got this site, it's got a brand new look, you've done all this work to migrate the content, not taking advantage of it at that point and getting it live seems like a waste to try to wait until you get all the personalization correct. So that's why I was suggesting that. You could do the implementation of the personalization first or as you're launching or however. But essentially what I'm trying to say here is like, get the benefit as soon as you can. You've done a bunch of work, make sure you get that big splash. So what would this look like from an architecture perspective? So if we have a situation like this, it's a pretty small solution, just a couple of delivery servers, a little bit of light personalization. They can move over to XM Cloud on a side-by-side. So they start standing up that content by migrating it over. They start building it out. Now, if they built an MVC, this team probably is very comfortable with .NET. So they can build it out on .NET, build up an Azure host for it. Maybe they might be willing to move over to Next.js, but this is an option for them as a team that they can go and build it out this way. So now they have a new site that's built out, they're ready to go, and now they can take offline that particular site that they had before. Now, something I wanted to note here is that because we didn't implement the personalization, now we've launched the new site, we don't have a reference for what that personalization is anymore. So I suggest keeping something at least local or in a dev environment or something like that, where you have that XP personalization set up so you have a reference. It probably doesn't apply to the new UX exactly, but you want to keep that around until you're finished and you're sure. Then you go in, use pages, build out all your personalization variants, and now you can retire that like local backup, and now you're fully done, migrated over, everything's ready. Okay. So I've looked at two kind of simpler scenarios. What if we take this to a customer that's a little bit different? So this one we call a maintainer. So they're in that profile of they're keeping up to date, but they're not really updating the site, but they've gone deep into XP. They're using heavy personalization. They've got all kinds of historical based stuff. They're doing marketing automation and emails, and they've really taken advantage of the full suite of capabilities that they could. And now they've been trying to look at like, how does this move to an XM cloud? They're pretty, modern in terms of versions, but they don't really have the capability from a headless perspective to do what like the XM Jamstack did, where you just point the app at a new back end. So they're going to have to try to figure out how they can migrate some of this functionality off. So I usually, as a high level, it's like get from XP to XM, then XM to XM Cloud with personalize and send as a high level. One of the advantages of starting by tracking with personalize is that you start building up the data so that by the time you get around to finishing your migration into personalize and send, uh, you've got data there already and you don't have to worry about XDB data. The migration of send to send and personalize, what that's about is getting rid of all that XP infrastructure you're maintaining. You probably have dispatch servers and all that kind of stuff. So we can stand up these headless services, move everything in. And by step two, we've already created basically a composable DXP. We've got an XM and we've got send and we've got personalized that are already headless. This is a pretty good state to be in. We get a lot of return early on in the project. Then one thing we could do for this customer is to get them off of that old SXA site and move them over into Next.js, run it against Edge, and get them ready to go to XM Cloud. So essentially update the application, keep them on XM for now, but get some benefit of getting all that headless stuff, get that content delivery infrastructure sorted. And then the migration to XM Cloud is super easy because we're basically in that Jamstack model already, and we can launch it off, retire the old XM infrastructure. So if we looked at this with the scenario of like how they're built out right now, where they've got kind of this really complex backend XP infrastructure that they're maintaining, but a pretty lightweight content delivery end. And this is where I say, well, I look at this and the part to tackle is really all this infrastructure on the back end. They don't want to have to manage the infrastructure. Let's tackle where the complexity is first. So let's get personalized in, start tracking it so we can build up that data so we don't have to do XDB migration later. Then let's put in send, start getting rid of all the marketing automation plans, getting rid of the EXM dispatch servers. We're starting to simplify what we're doing on the back end. And then we can start moving over fully into personalize and get rid of all that XP infrastructure. So now we're just a content system. And we've moved everything else that was XP related out, which makes us have a lot more flexibility in what we do next. This is that stage where we want to go to Edge. Now, this is probably a big chunk, depending on what kind of size this site is, or maybe it's multiple sites. And we're trying to essentially build a new presentation layer on top of the existing content. By doing this, this is going to prep us to be able to go to XM Cloud. And especially since they've been keeping up to date, they've got headless SXA available to them. We can get everything all set up the way we want it. And then finally, we move over to XM Cloud. Now we have no more infrastructure we have to manage. They've got everything over in this kind of composable cloud, which is a great place for them to be. So those sounded, pretty straightforward in terms of each one of those scenarios. But what if we had something really bad? Or I shouldn't say bad, but super complex. Bad for somebody who has to do the upgrade. You've got sites all over the world, hundreds of them. Some of them are up to date and have been done on Next.js and Edge. Some of them are MVC and running on like Sitecore 8 or 9. You've got SXA sites, you've got some React sites, like it's all over the place. Some of them have been kept up to date, some of them haven't. You've got all spread out across the world. So this type of a global brand customer with these hundreds of sites, they can't just pick all that up and go over to something new. But they may want to go to something like XM Cloud and start getting benefits out of it. So similar to the last scenario, I would suggest starting to track with personalize, because you can do that very easily on all those sites without making much code changes. So we can start building up the data on all these sites and kind of gradually roll out personalize across that whole organization. Then I think the best play to do in this particular scenario is, how do we get a company that's got so many content delivery servers all over the world? How do we simplify that part of the infrastructure? So in the last scenario, the complexity is in the back end. This scenario, the complexity is in that global delivery. So how do we solve them for that? How do we get them onto Edge, which can deliver really quickly? How do we get them onto like a static site host like Vercel or Netlify? Put them out there however we can, whether it's with static site generation or some other tool, or rebuilding if it's a small enough site, right? Like, get them up on the edge. Then we want to transition from XP over to XM. So now that we've got personalize in, we want to adopt it. We want to get all those sites no longer doing personalization through XP, and we want to get rid of that infrastructure on the back end, get us into that Jamstack mode. Now, step 4, I put this in here as like, if you took any shortcuts in step 2, where you didn't actually build it against Edge and you're just kind of like taking an SXA site or an MVC site and kind of static publishing it, we have to finish those off before we go to XM Cloud. Those have to be ready for that jump. And the good thing about going through all these steps gradually is they can do these on different sites at different times and get more and more of them into XM Cloud. So it looks like it's a linear step 1 through 5, but really you're doing these on every single setup. And so this customer might still have stuff in their XM, they might still have stuff over in their XM Cloud, and they can gradually go over that over however long they have to do this. So if we take a look at what that looks like. So here's an example of what an architecture for that might look like, where you've got some headless implementations, a whole bunch of MVC, and that massive content delivery mess. And that's what they want to get rid of. They are tired of having to deal with this global delivery problem. So the first thing we're trying to do is get that personalization in. We want to just track it. We're not actually personalizing yet. Just put that tracker everywhere, build up the data. Then we're getting rid of that content delivery. We can't go rid of it all the way. We want to get as much as static site delivery at this point so we can make their content delivery lives easier, simplify it. But the fact of the matter is we're still personalizing with XP at this stage. So we can't get rid of CD completely. So we need to have some infrastructure there, but we're starting to make the problem better. Then we want to transition to XM, and this is where we adopt fully into personalized. We start rolling it across all those teams. They're implementing their rules. They're getting their site up to date because the personalized has already been added to them. And we can do this gradually on each site and make it so that we can get rid of all the necessity of XP being there, which again simplifies their life a lot. Their infrastructure gets a lot leaner, and they're moving more and more into the cloud. Now we're in a perfect place to finally get rid of any dependency on content delivery. We don't want any requests coming back to that. How do we get every single one of those apps pointed at Edge? So again, now we look, all of those apps are going to look just like that XM Jamstack scenario. And now, boom, we go over to XM Cloud. I say boom, but I mean, like, there's probably a massive content migration stage involved here, because all those sites are going to have to move over and figure their way out. And this might not even just be one XM Cloud. They might have multiple XM Cloud projects. They might have multiple environments. So it could be complex here, but what we're doing is we're getting rid of that infrastructure management. And at this stage, they're not managing the CM. They're not managing the delivery. They're not even managing the static site hosting because they're using a service that can allow them to push that out. So this gets them into a really great state where it's modern. They are up on a composable DXP. Alrighty. That was a lot of scenarios. I hope I haven't put anybody to sleep. We will do some questions here. But before we get into that, I want to talk about how I made that kind of look easy. And there are things that we have to look out for. I want to call out, because Rob's on the call here. If you haven't seen Rob's presentation, go find a recording of it somewhere. Rob highlights a lot of these things as well, things that you need to look out for when you're doing the migration going through this project. So make sure you take a look at that too. So this isn't exhaustive, but some of the ones that I thought, applicable to what I just talked through. I mentioned doing transitions from XP to XM, from XM to XM Cloud. All of those are usually content migrations. And anyone here who has done a content migration knows that it's never just like hit the button and it's done. Sometimes it's easier than others, but there's always something that comes up. Right now, today, Sitecore content serialization is one of the better tools that's available because it comes with XM Cloud. You can get it on the latest versions of XM, so you can have them talk together and kind of just move content over. The content model matches up. I mean, it's still XM items under the hood in XM Cloud, so you're able to migrate a lot of your stuff as is. You might have to do some remodeling after the fact, depending on what you've done on the other side in XM Cloud. Um, but if you're doing a gradual migration, this could mean that you've got multiple steps you have to go through. So we need to plan for that when we're doing it. Another thing to talk about is the customizations that have been done in a lot of implementations. One of the big powers of Sitecore XM and XP has been you can customize it all kinds of ways with all your pipelines and whatever processors you're putting in into the web config. There's a lot you can do and extend. And not all of that is going to carry over to XM Cloud and be supported. So a lot of XP functionality, it's just not there anymore. So any of those modules, they're just not going to work. Customizing the content delivery server, for example, doesn't work because there is no content delivery server. We have Experience Edge, which is an API layer, and you can do webhooks and stuff like that. But the idea of doing something on the pipeline, most of the stuff that you're doing, like a Dianoga, for example, that's not going to make sense in an XM Cloud world. We have to think about how would we solve that in a headless solution. The other thing to think about would be if you've got custom modules that were installed. We don't install modules into XM Cloud that same way anymore. So you need to basically go through, analyze, remove as many customizations and modules that you have as possible that aren't compatible, and make that kind of part of the analysis of how big is this move going to be. And a big question a lot of devs have, I don't know what the distribution is on this call, but a lot of folks are .NET devs that have come up in the Sitecore community already. And now we're having everything coming out from Sitecore talking about Next.js with the Next.js starter kit and the Next.js samples and the Next.js docs, right? We've got a lot of stuff very tightly on that. So it makes things easier for new devs coming in from the industry, who are more front-end devs. They can build the way that they're used to with a technology that seems more familiar. And there's lots of examples from us. That's great. And it works really well for them. However, there are going to be some teams where it makes more sense to stick with .NET, that maybe they've already built on .NET Core headless with Sitecore 10. That's the way they want to go, and you can migrate that over to XM Cloud. We did that for one of our sites, mvp.sitecore.com, for example, was a Sitecore 10 site. We built it headlessly as an example. And so when we wanted to migrate to XM Cloud, we didn't want to rebuild the whole thing. We just migrated it mostly as is, and we changed up some things to work with Edge. The other thing is that it's a real skill gap. .NET developers who also are really great Next.js developers, that's not as common as maybe everybody would like. So some teams maybe purchased Sitecore because that was what made sense for the team they had, right? They were looking for a .NET technology. So those teams are probably more likely to want to stay there instead of trying to reskill the whole team. One thing I do call out here on the slide is around XM Cloud embedded personalization. So something Dylan pointed out to me was that when they built out the Engage SDK, it was built for Next.js. So while you can invoke the SDK manually in .NET, the whole automatic stuff that happens with the SDK with a Next.js site just doesn't happen on a .NET site. So I don't know if anybody's built out an example yet of how to do that. We haven't done that yet on our .NET site, but it is on our to-do list to try to get that personalization working so we can show people how we do that. Okay. Do you use XM Cloud for personalization, or do you need personalize? Extending, you might actually need CDP as well. But if we were just talking about XM Cloud or personalized, this is a big question on any migration project. In the sample scenarios I showed, 2 of those customers were fine with just XM Cloud. 2 of them needed personalized. Do they need to go past like 30 days? XM Cloud has a very tight window of how long it keeps data around. So if they need to personalize over a longer period of time, they might need to go to something like personalized or even CDP, depending on like how long the historical need is. Do they need to start adding custom rules? There are certain rules available with XM Cloud. If you want to start extending that, well, then that's where you're looking at this team is too advanced for what XM Cloud provides. They need to go up into a true personalization product. There's the concept of external data systems, pattern card, like there's all kinds of things that they might be using. So the example I had with somebody who'd really taken advantage of marketing automation and email automation, like they really went deep on XP. And that's not everybody, right? Like 70% of our customers, from the data we gathered, have not taken advantage of all those features. So what we're doing is look at the customer. Are they in that 30%? Did they really take advantage of everything? We talk about the mythical phase 2. There are customers who went phase 2 and beyond. They are out there. We have to identify, are they in the 30%? Because they may not be a fit for just XM Cloud. They might need more. And then it's a question of like how they want to go about doing that. Now, if they choose that personalize is the right fit because they have that extra data, at that point, there is this like disconnect, like both from a training perspective and also a feature perspective and how everything is like personalized and XP are not the same ideas. They do not do things the same way. It's not going to be just I built this rule over here, I'm going to copy paste it over, right? So we're looking at probably having to do digital strategy to have somebody analyze what's currently being done and then figure out, okay, given that business goal, how do I do that with personalize? So you need kind of an expert in personalize and somebody who can understand what was done before from a business goal perspective, figure that strategy out. And then there's the question of what data do you need? Sometimes moving XDB data is really necessary. The customer might have been using XDB as a central store of record. So that's where all the information is, and you got to put it somewhere. If you can't get rid of XDB without putting that somewhere, because you might need it. You have to question what is the data I actually need, and what data needs to go into personalize that's going to be used for personalization versus what data needs to go into a different type of system, maybe a CDP or a CRM or something like that. So we have to plan out what that composable data structure looks like and then move the data that is critical where it needs to go. All right, there was another thing I wanted to look at with migration to personalization that I wanted to call out is that in all the scenarios where I talked about a gradual migration, at some point we've got 2 personalization systems running. And you do not want those conflicting on the same place, right? You don't want to have a single site where you go to the homepage and you've got some XP personalization running, and then you've also got Sitecore personalized grabbing stuff down. It works, but now you've got no way to really predict what's going to happen and debug. It's a lot easier to just migrate stuff over and turn it off as you go. So if you can do it by site, you could do it by like sections of sites. You might have different ways of doing this, but try to target it so you're not doing that overlap because it could make things really complex for you. Alrighty. I talked about in the last scenario about the idea of going headless but not rebuilding. In 10.2, we added the capability to get to static sites on an MVC SXA site using something called static publishing. There's also options like with Uniform and some others where you can get that kind of Jamstack feel without doing a rebuild. So this is a great way to get a small amount of effort and get a big benefit in terms of your core web vitals and what you're managing from an infrastructure for delivery perspective. But there are limitations if you stick with static site publishing. A lot of sites you have to be either more simple or you're not doing personalization or something like that. If you're using the static site publishing, you might have to do an upgrade to get access to it. So that's something to ask is like, is the solution I'm looking at, if I upgrade it all the way to 10.2 or 10.3 or 10.4, is that effort more than I would get by just taking this simple site and changing it over? So you have to make those kind of calls as to which step is the right way to go. I mean, obviously the best bet is just get it the way you want it on XM Cloud right away. But not every scenario is going to be like that. Sometimes you need to get that benefit faster. And that is where you might be looking at this static publishing as a shortcut. Okay, and finally, talking about EXM, like XP and Personalize, EXM is not send. They have different visions. They solve problems differently, and you're not looking at like migrating your templates over. You can migrate things like contact lists, like they're, you basically do an import export type of thing. But mostly you're redesigning your templates, you're redesigning your flows, you're figuring out how to do it in the new tool. And Send has the capability to do personalization like EXM, but they do it very differently. It's a different type of approach that they have there. They may not be one-to-one. So when we're doing this kind of migration, we need to make sure that we're planning it with the customers, that this makes sense. They're okay with what's in Send. Some customers might want to stay on EXM. Maybe it does exactly what they need to. So this is something to figure out. And there's always going to be little dependencies that you've set up in the sites. You're going to have the concept of EXM having that XDB available to it. Send doesn't have that. So Send, you have to connect it to some system of record for all that data if you want to use it. So there's different kind of planning that goes into that migration. It's not going to be a push a button and suddenly it works. So make sure you're aware of that. The other thing to look at is, where's the problem to solve? So in my marketing automation example, we noticed that the content delivery complexity was really low and the XP complexity of the infrastructure was really high for them. If that customer is worried about managing infrastructure, if they want to go cloud because they don't want to manage that and update it, we have to address wherever the complexity is first so that we get them to that place where they're happy. They've done an investment and they're seeing benefits right away. So where do we have the problems? Go after where that is. And just as a note, they probably have built up a lot of reputation with their current email sending. Now, there's not a lot of people who have done this EXM, but if you land one of these projects and you have to migrate it over, just remember you're going to have to build up reputation again. Don't just cut over right away, or you're going to have like that low reputation. You might get blocked, things like that. So warm up your service always when you start launching this new stuff. Okay, so thank you very much. That was a lot. I'm just dumping what's in my head right now on all of you. So here's some places where you can go and find things after the fact. We have a page that is on the developer portal that is purely dedicated to migrating to composable DXP. We got videos and articles, and we've got all kinds of stuff about how to go between specific products or general guidance. And that's where we're going to want to collect more. This is an open source page. So if you see something we don't have that's been done in the community, or you've built something and you want other people to see about it, let's get it up there, right? We want to make this like the landing place where all of us can go and find the tools and guides that we need to help these migrations go forward. Also on the developer portal, we have done a changelog implementation recently. So our team has been working with different products. This week, we got Search and Discover on there. So we're now up to 6 of the composable DXP products are there. So if you want to keep up to date on like what those features are, or you're talking to a customer and you want them to be able to see, okay, what's actually changing? What are people getting with this, like automatic updates? This is a great place to go. You can see how often things change, what type of changes are happening, what new features are coming along, and you can drill into specific projects. We also put in RSS and Atom feeds. You may want to listen to one of those in your email. You can listen to product-specific pages if you're only interested in a specific product. So we're really proud of doing this. We think it's taking us into that next step, and we're going to keep working on bringing more and more products on board with this. The other thing we did over there on the developer portal for you is put in a federated search. This has been in there for some time, but we recently launched it with St-Cyr search driving it. All kinds of sites that we're pulling in, including Stack Exchange, including the forums, including docs. So this is a good place where if you're looking for St-Cyr stuff, this might be a way for you to find things across all those different sites that we have. The good thing about this too is that the repo behind this is open source. So you can see the example of how we implemented search and then bring that over into your project. A lot of sites that are going to go to XM Cloud, I expect will also want some kind of search capability. They may not need to federate 10 sites, but they may want to have a search on their website. And if they don't already have a third-party service, they might be looking at something like Sitecore Search. Whew, all righty. With all that said, I am very interested in figuring out, what have you been seeing? What are the questions you have? What did I put anything up here that seemed like, I don't know about that, Jason? So let's turn the floor over to everybody here and see what questions we've got. I'm not sure if our approach here should be like raise your hand in the Teams tool. Okay, Vladimir, I think you're up.
Hi, yes. Hi, Jason.
Hey
And good
there.
morning, everyone. Hi, I'm Vladimir Moyano. I am a DevOps engineer. I have been working with Sitecore for like 7 years. And I've done actually multiple projects with major versions upgrade in which we had to do a content migration with large blocks of content. So
Mm-hmm.
my question is, what tools can we do or can we use to serialize content or do content serialization so that we can migrate these large and extensive blocks, for example, from Psycho or let's say a version 9 to an XM or
Yeah, so I
XM
think right
Cloud?
right now the tool that works best with XM Cloud is Sitecore's content serialization tool. So SCS. I I want to say it was 10.0 that was introduced in. Um, so if you're able to, so this would mean doing upgrade to that and then going over, but it is based on the YAML format. I haven't tried whether you could like serialize to Unicorn and then use SCS on it. I expect that some issues might show up trying to do it that way. Um, if you do go down that route, we are also building out tools right now that we are like within a month or two, I'm hoping we get them out. But the product team has been trying to build specifically around content migration, a tool, and I can't remember if I think they're leveraging SCS right now, but they're trying to do it so that it can point at the old version, and then essentially make SCS work against it somehow, and then bring it over into XM Cloud. So they're trying to build that out. They're looking at protobuf as well in the future as a way to get it to go even faster. We've been doing some prototypes on that as a interesting way to take massive amounts of data and translate it over. So those are some of the things we've looked at. Soon we should have announcements around tools, and we will make sure it goes on that migration page so that you can just easily find and go, oh, okay, click here to download. The idea is to do kind of a wizard-based, here's my source, here's my destination, similar to what some other tools we've had before.
Definitely. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Hey, no problem. Very good question. Very good question. Thank you. Did anyone else have question or comments or issues on their mind? Don't be shy, and you can always just hit the raise your hand, and you don't even have to turn on your camera if you're not comfortable. I guess I answered all the questions. I guess we're done. Don't worry. But seriously, if you do come up with a question after the fact and you're like, I just didn't feel like asking you directly there, you can reach out to me directly anytime or somebody on my team. You can follow me either on LinkedIn, you can grab me on Mastodon. I also have an account on Twitter, but I'm not really active there. I kind of cross post using Buffer, but you can always follow there. So make sure you send those in. If you got any questions, you can get me there. I'm also at Sitecore.com. You can also just email me directly, jason.stcyr@sitecore.com. Oh, Mariella has a question. You said Next.js is the recommended one in a headless solution, but do you have one experience with ASP.NET rendering SDK with XM Cloud in a real project? Are you talking about a customer project? I know our team did it in a real project because we had to get mvp.sitecore.com working on XM Cloud, and so we did it with that. I'm not aware of somebody who's built out on .NET yet in a customer base, but what I can do is drop a few examples here. So the site that we have running on .NET that we provided as an example is this mvp.sitecore.com and Sitecore/migration guides. Okay. And the example repository that has the code of how we did that is here in GitHub. So this is the XM Cloud introduction repo, also linked off of that migration guides area where you can go in. And Rob did a whole series of articles where he talks about some of the challenges he faced trying to bring it to .NET. So there were some things that just didn't work right away, and we had to change up a little bit. There was also some things we wanted to take advantage of in .NET 6. And I believe we also ran into some limitations trying to do search with Edge. So we didn't have Sitecore search implemented, and we were trying to do this like faceted MVP directory. So we ran into some challenges with the limitations on Edge as a search tool. It's great for doing queries. It's not so great for doing like complex faceted search. If we'd had search at the time available to us, we probably would have used that instead. But we were able to figure out a way where we could kind of work around the limitations, but involved a lot of basically caching over on the .NET side, all the data from Edge, and then running logic straight on it. We essentially built a middle layer for the data. I don't know if that addressed your question directly, but hopefully that helps.
Yeah, thank you very much.
No worries. And Vladimir, another question from you. What's up?
Yes. Also, you talked a little bit about the transition from Sitecore content delivery to Edge.
Mm-hmm.
So that was also another question. Can we start like prototyping this transition?
So the Edge APIs are available on platform. So you can get Edge for XM as a thing. Now a customer has to have it licensed. So that's one of the like challenges there. But essentially you want to be able to be pointing at the APIs for Edge instead of trying to pull directly from content delivery. So if you build in JSS, you're already kind of 95% of the way there because those API layers are very, very compatible with Edge. So you should be able to translate that a little bit better. For being fully sure, I would build against the Edge APIs because once you do that, you know there's no content delivery running through the layout service. And that's usually where some people who build with JSS, they've got stuff running on the CD that's affecting the layout service output on requests, which is great. You get a lot of flexibility with that, but then you've got a dependency on something that's not going to work in the XM Cloud world. So that's probably like this first start would be go headless. If you can get the Edge API in there instead, then you can really kind of see where you've got dependencies.
Alrighty. All right. Thanks again.
No worries. Freddie, you're up. What's going on?
Hey, Jason. Hey, everyone. You hear me?
Hello.
I have a question. What about the renderings? For example, if I had a Sitecore project in 9 version, and we have all these controller renderings and view renderings and in our CHTML files, how to migrate, for example, in Next.js, we have JSON renderings and all that code. It's a better approach to rebuild it, recode it, or what's your advice on this part?
If you're changing from MVC to Next.js, I mean, I would hesitate to say that there's much of that like rendering logic that you're going to be able to keep. There's probably stuff that you've done in styling in terms of CSS and things like that. And that's one of the reasons why I was highlighting the concept of like the modernizer profile, where it's like they're on the old stuff. They haven't been lived up. They haven't invested. They're at a time where making an investment in a new presentation layer makes sense, right? But if someone's been investing a lot in their presentation right now and it's all been going into MVC, they're probably not going to be as interested in kind of like taking all that stuff and trying to figure out the new way. A shorter path for some teams might be trying to go to .NET. So if you've built your MVC in a certain way, you can run it as that kind of like .NET MVC app, but hitting the headless .NET Core rendering. So that might be a shorter path in some ways. But again, you are still switching to a headless mode as opposed to running on the CDs. And a lot of folks have those renderings very specifically tied to that pipeline order that's running in St-Cyr, right? So there can be differences in how you go about handling in a headless solution. But I would say that is the most reuse possibility. But I would say the better target customers would be ones that are ready for that kind of, we need a new UI anyway. So let's make the time investment there. I think it was Richard Seal who tried to figure out a way to like automatically translate SXA renderings over into the headless SXA stuff. And I think we could get there partially. It's something that people at St-Cyr have been looking at. Like, is there a way to kind of automate this? We haven't found any way that's going to be 100%. And most of the times it seems like it's faster to just get a good front end person in who could just like whip out the UI and then plug it into the APIs. Seems like that usually takes less time.
Okay. Thank you, Jason.
Okay, no worries. Oh, one other point I just wanted to make on that one, Freddie, is also when we're thinking about pages and components, some people, when they're moving to XM Cloud, if they are doing that kind of UI refresh, they're thinking about doing components in a different way now because they've got this component builder available, which isn't available in the platform. So it's an opportunity to take advantage of that new tool, as opposed to a migration where you're going to try to like move like to like, and then you don't get to take advantage of that new feature. So that's something to, as you're planning, like, how do we want to do this? Right now, we've been, on our team at least, my team wants to look at how we could do some of our sites using components instead of the kind of headless SXA variants that exist today. And it doesn't do as much as SXA does today. I think in the future, it'll be the right place to go. It's definitely the future of where components are going to be, but I think today headless SXA is the way to go. Alrighty. I'm glad we got some warm up with some great questions here. That was awesome. Always like to hear what people are having as their concerns. Vikrant, we've got another question. What's on your mind?
Hi, Jason. I hope I'm audible. Yeah. I have one question about XM Cloud. How do hotfixes and patches are handled? And like what is the best way to handle those in local since we will have that containerized?
Oh, you mean for your local Docker that you're building? How
Yeah,
does that get patched?
to keep those in sync, what we have on XM Cloud or on the upper environment with our local.
Okay, so right now I haven't had to do this, but the way I have done it when I'm doing my local environments is that I'm always rebuilding against the latest of whatever's being pushed. So when they're doing automatic updates that updates your infrastructure, that's also being released as the container images. So as long as you are rebuilding your local from those, you should be okay. But if you're using kind of like a local repo where you've got copies of that, that's not necessarily going to be up to date. So I think the recommendation that I've usually seen has been to try to make sure you're using the latest that's matched up with the infrastructure. Rob just popped on camera. Do you got an idea here, Rob?
I just wanted to confirm, Jason, Java you have there. the ACR, the container registry, is just updated automatically. So if you at the end of the day just down your containers and then up them the next day, you basically get updates whenever they are available. So it should be kept automatically up to date.
Yeah, I think the only thing is if somebody is like downloading those and then putting it into their own container registry.
Yeah, but
please
that's
don't
not
do that.
recommended as a
Yeah.
yeah. And the only thing that I'm looking at right now is how if you also can keep the kind of the starter templates in GitHub, if you can get that up to date, but that's a little bit difficult. But I went through it and I don't think there's much that needs updating. So as long as you just keep in the link to the container registry, then you'll find that's basically it, I think.
Yeah, we have run into some issues with the Head Start template where, like, for example, my get blew up and everything in that template was referencing my get as the source for the packages. So we go, okay, well, we'll fix this, but we can't push that in any way to everybody else. Everybody else has got to go update as well their references for the repo. So there's those types of things that happen where, yeah, it's that part of it is not easy. We've also done things where this was early on in the XM Cloud days, we changed the rendering variants that ship. So when you start a site and you get a bunch of your Next.js components, that's great. But then if we go and add more or we change up how the structure is on that, you don't get that. Your site is still kept safe. But it does mean if you want to update it, there's like a manual step you have to do to update those with whatever's the latest. Thank you, Rob. And great question, Vikrant. We have a question, I believe. I can see the raised hand. Is it, I'm not sure if it's Pandyan or Prabharaj.
Yeah, hi, Jason. This is Prabhu.
Prabhu.
Yeah, so
Nice to
this
meet
is a question related to infrastructure. So I understand this may not be a straightforward answer, or we don't have a straightforward number. So customers are more interested to know what will be the saving if they move from XP to XM Cloud, right? So mainly infrastructure and maintenance cost. At least in some percentage, if we have some number which you are from a product team, so you may be having something interesting on that.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know what the answer is to that. I think when I've heard other people answering this question, that it's always it depends, because every customer has a different profile and then they switch to XM Cloud and what their cost is on the new thing might not be equivalent in the same way as another customer. So some customers, for example, are heavily over provisioned in Azure. So it's easy for them to get a cheaper cost with XM Cloud because we only size it to what your usage is. But then other customers are doing very lightweight Azure infrastructure, and then maybe their visits warrant a different cost level for licensing with XM Cloud. They might not get the same amount of savings. I think it's also important when talking to customers, it's not just about your Azure bill versus your Sitecore bill. You're also looking at who owns what. So what's the total cost of ownership there? So how much is the value of paying somebody else to do the upgrades, somebody else to do making sure that things are online, somebody else to make sure that your service is provided and provide the support on that. So there's additional things just to make sure to keep in mind when you're looking at it, comparing to include all those numbers of who's having to do that there. Hopefully, I know it's not the perfect answer, but I will try to look and see if we have something around that.
Yes,
take a note on that.
Okay, we are top of the hour. Do we have any more questions? Okay, I think we are done with the questions. Thanks, everyone. And thank you, Jason, for the wonderful and insightful session. And
happy to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you. And I also thank all the participants who attended this session and asked a lot of beautiful questions here. Made the session real lively. Thank you all. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Cheers all.